What happens when America's sweetheart Kelly Clarkson finds herself in the most uncomfortable interview of her career? What started as a routine morning show appearance quickly spiraled into television. Chaos that left viewers stunned and studio executives scrambling. This is the story of how a simple question about her personal life triggered a confrontation so intense that Kelly Clarkson walked off the Today Show set, leaving Creig Melvin speechless and producers in complete panic. If you want to see how this explosive situation unfolded from start to finish, make sure to subscribe and let me know in the comments what you think really caused Kelly to snap. The morning started like any other at the NBC studios in New York City. Kelly Clarkson, fresh off another successful season of her daytime talk show, was scheduled for a standard promotional interview with Creig Melvin on the Today Show. She was there to discuss her latest album, upcoming tour dates, and her continued success as a television host. The energy in the studio was positive, with crew members chatting casually as they prepared for what everyone assumed would be another feel-good segment. Kelly arrived at the studio in high spirits, greeting everyone warmly and making small talk with the makeup artists and production assistants. She had always been known for her down-to-earth personality and genuine interactions with people behind the scenes. Creig Melvin, equally prepared and professional, had his talking points ready and seemed excited to chat with one of America's most beloved entertainers. As they settled into their chairs on the iconic Today Show set, the familiar bright lights illuminated both hosts, and the cameras began rolling for what was supposed to be a light-hearted 8-minute segment. The first few minutes went exactly as planned. Creig opened with his signature warm welcome, introducing Kelly with genuine enthusiasm and highlighting her recent achievements. "Kelly, it's always such a pleasure to have you here." With a smile, "You've been absolutely killing it with your talk show, and now you've got this incredible new album. Tell us about the inspiration behind these new songs." Kelly's face lit up as she launched into her prepared response about the creative process and how her personal experiences influenced her music. She spoke passionately about working with different songwriters and how this album represented a new chapter in her artistic journey. The conversation flowed naturally, with both participants clearly comfortable in their roles. "The thing about this album," Kelly explained, gesturing expressively, "is that it really captures where I am right now in my life. I wanted to be completely honest about my experiences, both the good and the challenging moments. Music has always been my way of processing everything." Creig nodded along, asking follow-up questions about specific tracks and her upcoming tours. The interview seemed to be progressing perfectly, with Kelly appearing relaxed and engaging as she always did during promotional appearances. She laughed easily at Creig's jokes and provided thoughtful answers to his questions about her career trajectory and future projects. "Now, I have to ask," Creig said, leaning forward slightly. "Your fans are always curious about your personal life. You've been pretty open about your divorce and how that affected you. How are you handling everything now, and are you seeing anyone special?" The question seemed innocent enough, the kind of personal but not invasive inquiry that celebrities typically expect during morning show interviews. Kelly's smile remained, but something subtle shifted in her demeanor. She paused for just a moment longer than usual before responding. "You know, Creig, I'm in a really good place right now," she said, her voice maintaining its warmth, but with a slight edge that only someone paying close attention might notice. "I'm focused on my kids, my career, and just taking things one day at a time. I think that's the healthiest approach for me right now." Creig, either not picking up on the subtle change in her tone or choosing to push forward anyway, decided to probe a little deeper. "That's wonderful to hear. There have been some rumors lately about you and a certain someone. Any truth to those stories?" Kelly's expression tightened almost imperceptibly. "I prefer to keep my private life private, Creig. I think my fans understand and respect that boundary." The response was polite but firm, the kind of gentle redirect that experienced celebrities use when they want to move away from a topic. Most interviewers would have taken the hint and smoothly transitioned to safer ground. However, Creig seemed determined to get something more substantive from this line of questioning. "I completely understand wanting privacy," he continued, "but your fans love you and they want to see you happy. Surely you can give us just a little hint about what makes Kelly Clarkson happy these days outside of work." Kelly's jaw tightened slightly and her hands clasped together in her lap. The camera caught the subtle shift in her body language, though. Viewers at home might not have immediately recognized the warning signs of growing frustration. "What makes me happy," Kelly said, her voice still controlled, but with a noticeable coolness, "is being able to come on shows like this and talk about my music and my career, without having every aspect of my personal life dissected for entertainment." Value. The tension in the studio became palpable. Crew members exchanged glances, sensing that the interview was veering into uncomfortable territory. Creig, however, seemed either oblivious to the growing tension or unwilling to back down from what he perceived as a newsworthy moment. "Kelly, I think you might be reading too much into this," he said with a laugh that felt forced. "We're just having a friendly conversation here. Your fans tune in because they care about you as a person, not just as a performer." Kelly's eyes flashed with something that looked suspiciously like anger, though she maintained her composure. "And I appreciate that support, Creig. I really do. But caring about someone doesn't mean they're entitled to know every detail of their private life." The exchange was becoming increasingly uncomfortable, with both participants clearly at odds about the direction of the conversation. Creig seemed to believe he was conducting a standard celebrity interview, while Kelly was obviously feeling invaded and defensive about her boundaries being pushed. "I'm not asking for every detail," Creig replied, his own tone becoming slightly sharper. "I'm asking basic questions that any celebrity would expect in an interview. This is what you signed up for when you became a public figure." Kelly's face flushed slightly, and her voice took on an edge that regular viewers of her talk show had rarely, if ever, heard before. "What I signed up for was to promote my album and talk about my work. I didn't sign up to justify my personal choices or provide gossip fodder for people who think my private life is their entertainment." The studio atmosphere had shifted dramatically from the warm, welcoming environment just minutes earlier. Creig seemed taken aback by Kelly's sharp response, but instead of recognizing the warning signs and changing course, he doubled down on his approach. "Kelly, I think you're being a little defensive here," Creig said, his professional smile wavering slightly. "I'm not trying to invade your privacy. I'm doing my job, which is to ask questions that our viewers want answered. You've been very open about your personal struggles in the past, so I'm not sure why this particular topic is off limits." Kelly's composure was clearly being tested. Her hands were now gripping the arms of her chair, and her voice carried a sharpness that cut through the studio's bright, cheerful facade. "There's a difference between choosing to share your struggles to help other people and having someone push you to reveal things you're not ready to discuss. I thought you would understand that distinction." The camera operators continued filming, though some crew members were beginning to look uncomfortable. The segment was supposed to be wrapping up soon, but both participants seemed locked in a battle of wills that showed no signs of resolution. "Look, I respect your right to privacy," Creig continued, "but you have to admit that when you put yourself out there as a public figure, especially someone who hosts their own talk show where you discuss personal topics with guests, people are going to be curious about your own life." Kelly's eyes narrowed, and her voice dropped to a dangerously calm tone that anyone who knew her well would recognize as a warning sign. "So, because I choose to create a safe space for my guests to share their stories, that means I've somehow forfeited my own right to boundaries." "That's an interesting perspective, Creig. That's not what I'm saying at all," Creig replied, clearly flustered by the direction the conversation had taken. "I'm saying that you can't expect people not to be interested in your personal life. When you've built your entire brand around being relatable and authentic." Kelly leaned forward slightly, her voice gaining strength and conviction. "My brand, as you put it, is built on being genuine about my experiences when I choose to share them. It's built on respecting people and creating authentic connections. It's not built on feeding people's curiosity just because they want to be entertained by my personal business." The tension was now impossible to ignore. Other staff members in the studio were exchanging worried glances, and someone off-camera could be heard whispering urgently into a headset, likely communicating with producers in the control room. Creig seemed to realize he was in deep water, but appeared determined not to back down. "I understand your position, Kelly, but I have to be honest with you. This kind of reaction to basic questions about your personal life is going to make people wonder what you're trying to hide." The words hung in the air like a challenge, and Kelly's reaction was immediate and intense. Her face flushed with anger, and when she spoke, her voice was steady but filled with barely controlled fury. What I'm trying to hide, she repeated, her tone incredulous. Creig, what I'm trying to do is maintain some semblance of normalcy for my children and myself. What I'm trying to do is have relationships that aren't scrutinized and dissected by strangers. What I'm trying to do is be a human being who happens to be famous, not a famous person who's forgotten how to be human. Creig shifted uncomfortably, in his chair, finally seeming to recognize that he had pushed too hard. Kelly, I didn't mean to suggest, ... No, let me finish, Kelly interrupted, her voice rising slightly. You want to know what I'm hiding? I'm hiding the fact that sometimes I cry in my car after interviews like this because I feel like I can't win. If I share too much, I'm accused of oversharing for publicity. If I try to keep things private, I'm accused of being secretive or difficult. I'm hiding the fact that my kids sometimes ask me why strangers on the internet think they have a right to comment on every aspect of our lives. The raw emotion in her voice was palpable, and several crew members looked visibly uncomfortable, witnessing what was clearly becoming a very personal moment. Creig's expression had changed from defensive to concerned, but the damage seemed to be done. I'm hiding the fact, Kelly continued, that I sometimes wonder if the price of this career is worth it when I have to justify my basic human need for privacy to people who should understand better. You have a family, Creig. Would you want every detail of your personal relationships analyzed and judged by millions of people? Creig opened his mouth to respond, but Kelly wasn't finished. Her voice was now filled with a mixture of anger and pain that was impossible to ignore. And you know what else I'm hiding? I'm hiding how disappointed I am right now. I've always respected you as a journalist and as a person. I thought you understood the difference between legitimate journalism and gossip mongering. I thought you knew me well enough to recognize when you were crossing a line. The studio fell silent, except for the hum of equipment and the distant sounds of the bustling newsroom beyond. Creig looked genuinely shaken by Kelly's words, finally seeming to grasp the full impact of his approach. Kelly, I think maybe I misunderstood, he began, his voice much quieter than before. No, Creig, you understood perfectly, Kelly, said her voice now deadly calm. You just chose to prioritize what you thought would make good television over basic human decency. You chose to push someone who was clearly uncomfortable because you thought it would get you a moment that people would talk about. She paused, looking directly into the camera for a moment before turning back to Creig. Well, congratulations. You got your moment. People will definitely be talking about this. Creig's face had gone pale, and he seemed to be struggling to find words that could somehow salvage the situation. Kelly, I never intended... Your intentions don't matter as much as your actions, Kelly replied firmly, and your actions today have shown me that you're willing to make your guests uncomfortable for the sake of content. That's not the journalist I thought you were, and it's certainly not the person I thought you were. The weight of her words seemed to hit Creig like a physical blow. He sat back in his chair, clearly realizing that he had not only damaged his relationship with Kelly, but had done so in front of a live audience and recording cameras. I think, Kelly said, standing up from her chair, that this interview is over. Creig stared up at Kelly as she stood beside her chair, his face a mixture of shock and growing panic. The reality of the situation was clearly sinking in, not just for him, but for everyone in the studio. This was live television, and one of America's most beloved entertainers was about to walk off the set of one of the most prestigious morning shows in the country. Kelly, please, Creig said, his voice now stripped of its earlier confidence and taking on an almost pleading quality. Can we just take a breath here? Maybe we got off on the wrong foot? Why don't you sit back down and we can start over? Kelly looked down at him with an expression that was both disappointed and resolute. Start over, Creig. You can't just reset a conversation like it's a computer program. You can't unsay the things you said or undo the way you made me feel. That's not how relationships work, and it's not how respect works. The desperation in Creig's voice became more apparent as he realized she was serious about leaving. Look, I admit, I may have pushed a little too hard, but that's just good journalism. Sometimes you have to ask the tough questions to get to the truth. Kelly's laugh was sharp and humorless. The truth? What truth were you trying to get to, Creig? Whether or not I'm dating someone. How that information would somehow benefit your viewers. Or were you just hoping I'd give you something juicy that you could use to boost your ratings? Several crew members had now stopped what they were doing entirely, transfixed by the unfolding drama. Someone could be heard frantically whispering into a headset, presumably trying to get guidance from the control room about how to handle this unprecedented situation. "That's not fair," Creig protested, his professional composure completely abandoned now. "You're making this about ratings? When it's about connecting with our audience, people relate to you because you've been open about your struggles. They want to know how you're doing." Kelly shook her head slowly, her voice filled with a sadness that was perhaps even more devastating than her anger had been. "People relate to me because I choose to share my struggles in a way that helps them feel less alone. I share my experiences when I'm ready, in my own space, on my own terms. What you were trying to do was extract information from me like I was some kind of resource to be mined for content." She began removing the small microphone clipped to her jacket, her movements deliberate and final. "There's a difference between authentic connection and exploitation, and apparently you can't see that difference." Creig stood up abruptly, clearly panicking about how this would look and what the consequences might be. "Kelly, you're being dramatic. This is television. This is what we do. We ask questions, people answer them, and everyone moves on. You're acting like I committed some kind of crime." Kelly paused in removing her microphone and looked at him with an expression of profound disappointment. "A crime? No, Creig. But you did commit something. You committed a betrayal of trust. You took someone who came here in good faith, who trusted you to treat them with basic respect, and you decided that your agenda was more important than their comfort or dignity." The weight of her words seemed to hit Creig like a physical blow. His face went through a series of expressions, from confusion to recognition, to something approaching shame. Kelly, that wasn't my intention. I keep hearing about your intentions," Kelly replied, placing the microphone on her chair. "But intentions without consideration for impact are meaningless. You intended to do your job, but you didn't consider how your approach might affect me as a human being. You intended to get good content, but you didn't consider the cost of that content to the person providing it." She looked around the studio, taking in the faces of the crew members who were watching this unprecedented moment unfold. "You know what the saddest part is? I actually like doing interviews. I like connecting with people and talking about my work. But experiences like this make me want to retreat, to stop being accessible, to build walls instead of bridges." Creig's. The voice was now barely above a whisper. "Please don't let one bad interview change how you approach everything else." Kelly's expression softened slightly, but her resolve remained firm. "Creig, this isn't about one bad interview. This is about a pattern of behavior that treats celebrities like they're not real people, with real feelings and real boundaries. This is about a culture that thinks fame means consent to invasion of privacy." She began walking toward the edge of the set, her movement slow but determined. Creig followed a few steps behind her, still trying to find some way to salvage the situation. "What do I tell our viewers?" he called after her. "How do I explain this?" Kelly stopped and turned back to face him one final time. "Tell them the truth, Creig. Tell them that you pushed someone past their comfort zone for the sake of entertainment, and they chose to prioritize their self-respect over your show. Tell them that sometimes when you don't respect people's boundaries, they walk away." Her voice grew stronger as she continued. "Tell them that being famous doesn't mean being available for consumption 24 hours a day. Tell them that celebrities are human beings who deserve the same basic courtesy and respect that everyone else does." Creig stood frozen, clearly struggling with how to respond. "And tell them," she interrupted, "that I hope this serves as a reminder that the people they watch on television, the people who entertain them and try to bring some joy into their lives, are real people who go home to real families and deal with real struggles. We're not characters in a story that exists for their amusement." With that, Kelly Clarkson walked off the Today Show set, leaving Creig Melvin standing alone in the bright studio lights, surrounded by stunned crew members, and the weight of what had just transpired. The cameras continued rolling, capturing every moment of his visible distress as he tried to process what had just happened and figure out how to address the viewers who had witnessed this extraordinary confrontation. The silence that followed was deafening, broken only by the continued hum of equipment and the distant sounds of a newsroom that had no idea that television history had just been made. Creig stood there for several long seconds, looking like a man who had just realized the full consequences of his actions, before finally turning to face the camera with an expression of someone who knew that nothing would ever be quite the same again. So, what do you think really pushed Kelly over the edge? Was it Creig's persistence, his dismissive attitude, or something deeper about how celebrities are treated in our culture? Subscribe for more stories like this, and let me know in the comments what you think was the real breaking point in this unforgettable confrontation.